So we talked about managed service accounts introduced in 2008 R2 with Windows, SQL Server 2012. Only one server can use it. Group MSAs extend the functionality of multiple servers. Windows 2012, SQL Server 2014, right? So SQL Server 2012 is end of life this year, end of extended support. So hopefully everyone is on, 2014 or higher, but that is required for GMSAs. Active Directory managed passwords, never human we talked about all that, right? If you are familiar with LAPS, or the local admin password solution that is sometimes used for workstations, so that you don't have a local admin password that is known to lots of people, Microsoft has the LAPS, or local admin password solution, that does the same type of thing. The difference is that MSAs are for servers and services. Okay, so what are the components for a group managed service account? There's a key distribution service, part of Active Directory. Every domain controller has it. It creates and distributes a key associated with the GMSA, and it rotates that key automatically. The domain controller uses that key to compute the password. Okay, so this is all just public key based. The host or service retrieves the password from the domain controller. When you set up your GMSA, when you set up SQL Server to use the GMSA, you don't give it a password. You tell it to use this GMSA, and all of that happens behind the scenes. So you never know the password of this account. Prerequisites. Your domain has to have at least one Windows 2012 or higher domain controller. This is not the functional level of the domain, right? So it isn't the type of thing where you have an old domain functional level, so you can't do this. What happens is when you have a Windows 2012 domain controller, it extends the Active Directory schema for the entire Active Directory, and there are some things that are needed for that. You have to be using Kerberos. No Kerberos, no managed service accounts. You have to have a root key that has been created for your key distribution service. This is a very simple PowerShell command to create this root key. You can't use GMSAs if you don't have the root key. On SQL Server, Windows 2012, SQL Server 2014, and your implementation steps will be confirm or add the KDS root key. There are some PowerShell commands that we're going to use to see how that works. Add KDS root key. One of the things to know is that when you create your root key, and that has to be done by a domain admin, or maybe even an enterprise admin, but that'll be your Active Directory people. It can take up to 10 hours to become usable, to replicate to all domain controllers. And in fact, in preparing this demo, I found that even with just a single domain controller, if you create the KDS root key, you can't use it for 10 hours. And I have a little bit of a hack so that we can do this within the context of the demo, but just be aware of that. So if you're going to implement GMSAs, very first prerequisite thing to do is to get your Active Directory team to create the KDS root key well ahead of time. You can then create a group which will contain servers that are going to use the GMSA. You don't have to do this. You can assign those computers directly to the GMSA. That's what we're going to do in the demo to make it simpler, but the preferred method would be to create a global security group. And then you create the service account. This is a specific type of account. You use a Active Directory or a PowerShell command to create it. And you're going to, when you create that MSA, you're going to authorize the group or the computer to retrieve the password. Finally, you're going to change the service account using SQL Server Configuration Manager. Somehow I put System Center Configuration Manager there. So that's definitely a typo that we'll fix before we distribute the slides. And you add a $sign to the end of the account name. That's how SQL Server knows that this is a MSA, and you don't have to provide a password. Go back over here to our domain controller, and we have our domain. So I have a few variables here. I have the fully qualified domain name, lab.sqlsolutionsgroup.com. I have the name of the computer account, which again, we have to have a $ at the end to tell AD that it's a computer account. And I have what do I want to call my GMSA. One of the requirements of a GMSA that's kind of a hassle is that the maximum length of the account name is 15 characters, which can be limiting, right? If your naming convention is longer than that. So it is what it is. All right. So if we look at our domain and we run get KDS root key, nothing comes back. We don't have a KDS root key, so we need to add that. What I'm doing here, normally we would say add KDS root key effective immediately, right? And so it would start now, and we have to wait 10 hours to use it. So what I'm doing is I'm actually giving it an effective time of 10 hours ago, right? Because I only have one domain controller. This is safe to do. This is a lab environment. You would not ever want to do this in your production domain. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. Let's see. I think this doesn't like PowerShell core. So, switch to regular PowerShell. Run that command. We can see that I got a GUID back from it. So now, if we say get KDS root key, didn't like it there either. So we're just going to do this over in this guy. So if we say get KDS root key, we can see that I have this key. The effective time was, again, 10 hours ago. Creation time, format, domain controller, server configuration. We're good to go with our KDS root key. There's also this command, test KDS root key, which is going to return true or false. So if I take that right there and run it here, it just returns a true, right? Once I have the root key, I can create the service account. So I'm using variables here. So it's new AD service account, the name of the account. The principal's allowed to retrieve the managed password. I'm just using the computer account here. Again, this could be a group that contains one or more computer accounts. It's enabled. I want it to rotate the password every 30 days. I can have that be as whatever value I want. And I finally have to give it the fully qualified domain name of the host, which is the account name.domain, right? I'm going to go ahead and run that command. And I need to run all of this over there, don't I? There. Okay, so now I created my service account. If I go to Active Directory users and computers, there is actually a folder that I can see, and I can see that my managed service account has been created, right? All right, now I'm going to go over to my SQL Server, and I'm going to go to my services, and I'm going to go to the SQL Server service, and I'm going to change the account. And I'm going to change it to lab GMSA GMSA and lab sec 201. I can't remember if I had SQL in it. GMSA lab sec 201 $sign. By including the $sign, I'm telling SCCM that this is a managed service account, so I don't have to provide a password. I'm going to say OK. It's going to restart the service. Always is going to do that when I change a service account. Takes a minute because it has to use the KDS to go get the password and do everything that it needs to do. And we now see that my SQL Server service is running as the GMSA. That's how easy it is to implement GMSAs. And once you've done that, you never have to touch that SQL Server account ever again. It's pretty slick. Go back over here, and we go back to our logs and so forth. We can say, test DBA SPN, and let's see what we have. How about that? We have a missing service principal name. So the DBA tools command automatically checks the SPNs based on the service account. We changed the service account. The service account did not have permissions to create the SPN, so we have a missing SPN. So what's the impact of that? Well, if I go back over here to my SQL Server and reconnect, target principal name is incorrect. Cannot generate SSPI context. This is that error that you'll see. Now, I should be able to, in some cases, I'll be able to reconnect and it will default to NTLM. Certainly if I go over to the server itself and look at it, but I'm, this is kind of broken, right? So how do we fix that? We're going to go over here and we're going to go to this command. Now I can use set SPN or Kubernetes configuration manager for this as well. But what I'm going to do, we saw this test DBA SPN that I just give it the computer name and it tells me if the SPNs are set. But then what I'm doing is I'm piping that to where object is set equals false, right? So that's this is set property. And then I'm passing that to set DBA SPN. I'm a domain admin in this lab domain. So I have the permissions to create SPNs. Whatever security context you run this under is going to have those permissions. But when I run that, failed to add SPN, a constraint violation. How about that? So this is the kind of stuff that you run into. And I actually had a couple people tell me I was crazy to demo SPNs because this is the kinds of things that you run into. So what we have here is we have some duplicate SPNs in our Active Directory that we can try this. Sometimes this gets really hairy trying to clean this up. I think that is probably not going to work. Yeah, the constraint violation. So this is where we would have to really dig with set SPN, set SPN-X. I actually, believe it or not, we have a consultant here at SQL Solutions Group who's not a DBA consultant. He's part-time for us, but is a master in identity. Actually helped write the Microsoft Certified Master for, I think they called it directory at that time. Now it's called identity. That, he's the guy that whenever I run into these hairy issues in customers' production domains, that we bring in. So that's service principal names, managed service accounts.